Hello and welcome to The Loudspeaker, your definitive guide on how to scale your startup.
This first tip for every fintech startup is:
what are the media and press saying about us? How are we being perceived by these people?
PR stunts are any activities that allow you to engage with the audience.
I don't agree with the fact that all publicity is good publicity.
Here is where we talk to communications professionals from all around the world to let you know what are the best practices and cool ideas that you can implement for your startups.
If you just want to start us off by sharing with our listeners a brief explanation of who you are and what Ironpaper does, please, Jonathan.
Sure. Yeah. So Ironpaper is a specialized agency. We consider ourselves a growth agency in that we help both the marketing and sales side. We specifically work with B2B companies that have a complex sale, a high price point, a long sales cycle, and more often than not, a group decision process where there's no single empowered buyer, but there's a kind of a group of people who come together, possibly from different functional areas, to make a decision that'll be truly impactful for their organization. We help with running ABM campaigns, improving inbound, and accelerating demand gen. But in our work, we focus on a single metric, helping companies generate qualified leads that can become sales opportunities. And I think what I love about my role is I get to help companies grow. I'm passionate about that subject. I love helping companies solve their growth problems and reframing what they do that in terms that buyers would understand.
Awesome, excellent. And I'm really happy to have you on because you seem like the perfect person to discuss our topic today, which is focusing on TOFU to BOFU. And we're going to be looking at the general marketing pipeline there. Now, I'm sure that many of our listeners will know what this is and what these acronyms mean. But in case anyone is unfamiliar with these terms, can you briefly explain what TOFU and BOFU mean and how this funnel works?
Absolutely. So the funnel, from top of the funnel to bottom of the funnel, is basically a staging system for a buyer's decision process. And a lot of marketers think of it in terms of three stages. There's top of the funnel, which has a lot to do with awareness. Middle of the funnel, where they start to put options on the table that they're exploring and investigating. And then there's bottom of the funnel, where they're starting to eliminate the options in their exploration and decision process. And they're zeroing in on the decision point. You know, do we select from the options available, or do we abandon the decision process altogether? So with top of the funnel, there are different ways that marketers describe the top of funnel decision process. But there's one commonality, which is it is about awareness. A lot of marketers may think about it as awareness of a brand, but I don't agree with that. I think the top of the funnel is where a buyer becomes more aware that they have a significant problem worth solving, a challenge worth solving. And they're not yet committed to investing in the solving of that problem yet. They're exploring and learning. And a lot of times what companies are doing at this stage is they're trying to understand, is it worth concentrating our time, concentrating our resources, to solve this problem? Is this a problem worth solving? Is it a challenge that truly affects our company? I just want to mention, though, a lot of marketers will focus on the awareness stage, or the kind of top of the funnel stage, as an awareness of a brand. But since Ironpaper works with companies that have a longer decision cycle and a high price point, we find that what a company starts to purchase in the beginning of their sales process and their decision process may change. They'll learn, they become educated, and over time, what they start to purchase may change as they gain more information.
Okay, yeah, I have to say of all of the topics within marketing, I really enjoy this one because I come from a psychology background, and there you mentioning that highlights the fact that I think this journey is a perfect fusion between marketing and psychology, and you're understanding, or trying to understand at least, what they're going through, what stages they're going through, and how you can direct them to choose you out of everyone else and the kind of content that you put in front of them. Now, I know this varies rather between business to business and business to consumer. And for this episode, we'll largely focus on business to business funnels. But I want to take a moment to clarify what the difference is between B2B funnels and B2C funnels and why that is important. Could you explain the difference between the two for our listeners, please?
Absolutely. So, in the context of B2C, what I find is that users can make a purchase more impulsively. They may just simply give it a try and make a decision in the moment. So there can be more of an emotional connection to the decision process. There's less research involved typically. There may be a greater emphasis on the user's the user's experience of a product, software, tool. And it's oftentimes a shorter sales cycle because there's less people involved. Whereas when you're purchasing on behalf of a business, typically what I find is that there will be more than one person involved in the decision process, because you're trying to make a decision on behalf of a business, an organization that is committing to a change of some sort. If they're purchasing services or a product or a kind of a platform, they're trying to gain a better understanding of how does this impact us as an organization. And because of that, the sales are a bit more complex. Oftentimes, B2B sales that have a higher touch sales cycle, and there's more need for buyer education over time. And so content may play even a larger role. And I don't want to play down the significance of content for B2C. Content's always important, but the longer your sales cycle, the more opportunity you have to educate a buyer. And if a seller isn't educating their buyer, the buyer will become educated nevertheless. They'll find education content, resources, tools, comparisons elsewhere from somebody else, from another organization.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to the B2C funnel, considering that we've all gone down it at some point, I suppose, if you've ever bought something online, pretty much. And there's definitely less risk in it. It's probably easier in that sense because, like you say, there's less people to consult with, less people involved in the process, and it's just more of a personal thing. It reminds me of a story. I can't remember where I heard this from. It might be a TV show or a movie, or I think it was a Reddit story, but of someone saying that they just do online shopping when they're drunk, or when they're really drunk, they order stuff off Amazon, and then a few days later they've received stuff and they don't remember ordering it, and they look up and they're, oh, I ordered that when I'm drunk. So I've never done that, but I find that like such a bizarre idea, receiving something in the mail and being like, did I order this, and realizing you did it when you're drunk. So definitely, yeah, business to consumer sounds like it could be a lot easier.
If you're interested in seeing how Publicize can grow your startup, sign up for a free PR assessment on our website. And for a limited time only, exclusively for the loudspeaker listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/LSpromo. But you mentioned about content there, and I'd love to get into content for the next question and essentially put it to you, like, how does content fit into the overall role of these funnels?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think content can take many formats. A company can produce content to educate their buyers and inspire them to go through this kind of decision process and consider them as an option. But you can also find content from third parties, reviews, comparison websites. So I'm going to spend more time talking about B2B for this call.
Mm-hmm.
In the B2B process, there are some critical components. One, a buyer is trying to educate themselves and learn more and validate whether whether they should be making a commitment to change. And so they're going to get their hands on as much content as they can. And the seller, a salesperson, isn't going to be the only resource for them to understand that decision point. They're going to rely on things like blog posts, research reports, even podcasts like this, webinars, videos. They're going to be looking at content not just in terms of comparison guides, but they're going to be looking at all of the different sources of information that can help them make a good decision that will positively impact the company that they're representing. I think oftentimes one of the big challenges I find is that companies create content about themselves, and it doesn't help the buyer understand how it impacts their business. And so one of the things I try to do is encourage clients to create content that focuses on the buyer's worldview, and it's not autobiographical. It's not just talking about the seller's products, the seller's company, but instead, we're talking about the buyer, what they care about, the challenges they're facing, the aspirations that they have, and the goals that their commitment to making change can bring about. So what I find is that we try to break up content so it's appropriate to each of the three stages of the B2B funnel. From top of the funnel, where a company is investigating, do we have a challenge that's worth solving? And do we want to make a commitment to change? Is this the right time? How much do we want to commit? Is it significant? How much of an impact is this? Are the challenges that we face affecting us? In the middle of the funnel, you're starting to put options on the table. You're starting to compare options, and it's not always that you're comparing similar options. You could be comparing, well, do we even take action now? Do we solve these challenges ourselves? Do we buy a solution? Do we hire an in-house team to kind of solve this problem? Do we change our processes and our approach? So the options could be quite varied. And in the middle of the funnel, you're exploring these options in more depth. You're trying to understand the options and how they compare to each other. And you're also still evaluating the significance of the problems you're wrestling with. Whereas at the bottom of the funnel, we're really in the kind of end stages of the decision cycle. You're starting to narrow down the options and decide between them. But the risk for a seller is that indecision is always the most critical factor, I think. More often than not, a seller isn't competing with some near field competitor. They're competing with indecision. And we see that over and over in the selling process. So content helps to educate, helps to inspire, and helps to guide the decision process.
Yeah, I think that's some wise words towards the end there. I mean, that's like what we try to do with this podcast. Like you mentioned it as content. I know that we try to first help our listeners by giving them access to knowledge and information through talks like these with knowledgeable guests like yourself. And also we like to showcase our own talent in here by interviewing our staff members to show that we know what we're talking about. But I think most importantly, content, like you said, should focus on the challenges that they face. And I've always called them, and I think this is a common term as well, like pain points. That's one thing that I always go by. So yeah, definitely. I think you hit a lot of nails on the head there. Now, I also want to say before this call, you mentioned something about the funnel that interested me. You said that you wanted to discuss the misconceptions of the consideration phase, why prospects are not considering your company, but rather considering how to solve their problem. And that kind of what works well after what we've just discussed there to lead on to next. So could you expand on this, please?
Of course, yeah. I see this a lot. So I see a lot of marketers focusing on these three stages: awareness, consideration, and decision, as being the awareness of a company and their products, the consideration of one company's solution to another company's solution as kind of an apples to apples comparison. But I feel like in the B2B buying process, it's a bit messier than that. A company may not even be competing against a near field competitor. They may be competing against an in-house team, or even they may be competing against indecision. So what I try to do inside of Ironpaper is ensure that the team focuses on what challenges companies have before them that cause them to commit to change, that would cause them to want to invest in solving their problems. Companies have all kinds of problems. They may have staffing problems, they may have inventory problems, they may have problems with cash flow. There are a whole collection of problems that they're facing, but you can't focus on all your problems at the same time. You have to set priorities. And so naturally, I think it's important to understand what are the priorities of your buyers. And for the seller, what does your solution solve from a business perspective, not just from a technical perspective? What kind of value does it create for a potential client, for a potential customer? And these are the factors that would cause a decision group to take that step forward, to commit to change. And I think it's a more profound way of addressing and communicating to buyers and with buyers. And I also think it opens up new opportunity for using your interaction with buyers as a feedback loop. I think there's a huge opportunity to learn more from your buyers, to understand to a greater degree what your buyers care about, what they're afraid of, what their concerns are, what they're struggling with, what's preventing them from growing and sustaining themselves into the future. And by gaining more intelligence and insights on what is compelling their desire to change, what is behind their desire to change, it's a better frame of reference to create content throughout the decision process.
Yeah, I have to say it reminds me of pain points again, and that always seems to be the case that it comes down to. But I think it's easy, as from my perspective, it seems like as long as it always comes down to like how are you helping to solve the pain points, like you said, and you mentioned a few like staffing, for example, then you're on the right track. Now, talking about something slightly different, can you explain the mistakes that B2B companies make when addressing buyers at each point of the funnel?
Yeah. I think sometimes I use this example from like dating. You go on a date and you talk all about yourself and you never ask the other person about themselves. And I think that can be very similar to the B2B buying process, where a lot of companies talk about themselves. They talk about their products, their solutions, their features. And buyers can become somewhat dizzy with all of the jargon and kind of insular gobbledygook talk. So what I find is a way to break free of that is think about what your buyers care about in their worldview and reframe how you talk about your solutions to fit the buyer's worldview, the buyer's perspective, to fit their business needs and their understanding of their core problems and aspirations as an organization. So
Yeah.
Just to say it simply, it's the autobiographical content that I think kills the buyer's journey in the selling process.
Yeah, I think that comes into sales a lot as well. I had a conversation on here recently with one of our top sales team members, a good friend of mine, and he's a very smart guy, very nice, and he was talking about how that's a big issue in sales, and the one thing that you really have to do is kind of like get to know the customer, but also like understand what's appropriate for them. And really the only way you can do that is by asking questions and like challenging misconceptions that they might have, obviously in like a fair way, not like you're wrong and just shouting at them, but yeah, like definitely more engagement is needed rather than we're excellent because of this and this is why you should go with us because we do this. And yeah, 100%. So my final question to you, what advice do you have for listeners who want to make the biggest impact at each stage?
Yeah, great point. I think most important part would be to understand your buyers. And if you can, more deeply specialize. Find a niche within the kind of different buyer groups that you focus on, and really zero in on that niche. Understand what makes them tick. Understand what's causing change in their world. And create a marketing system and a growth engine and a communication system that addresses their needs rather than kind of pushing your product speak and your jargon onto them. That will tune them out. Instead, focus on what matters most to them.
Those are wise words. And I think that is a great place to end today's episode. And if people do want to keep up with you, Jonathan, and the work you're doing at Ironpaper, or reach out, how can they do that? What's the best places for them to find you and keep up with you?
Our website's probably the easiest. It's ironpaper.com, ironpaper.com.
Super. We'll include a link to that in the description, and anyone can go there for that. But I just want to say thank you for joining me today. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Samuel.